What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Get Snuffed. We got the Yawn cast today because Madison and I are both incredibly tired, but we'll get through this. And today we are continuing with the top 20 game changers, going 10 through 1 today. How you doing, Madison?
Doing great. Really excited to do this podcast. I think we have a lot of really interesting things to say about these 10 people. Also, just fair warning in advance, they're doing some sort of construction in my apartment building today. I don't know what they're doing. I haven't heard it in like 5 minutes, but that doesn't mean that you guys won't hear it at some point during this podcast.
Well, that's good considering we're tired, just in case we need a jackhammer to wake us up.
Nothing that intense.
Well, it will be that intense. So, anyway, we are going to get right into this. Madison, you got a trivia question for me?
Yes. So today's trivia question brings us back to 2004. In the aftermath of Survivor All-Stars, there was something called America's it's America's Tribal Council. Yep. And they gave out 6 total awards. One of them was America's winner, which was Rupert, which we all know.
America's favorite,
what were the Yeah, whatever it was called. I don't know. It didn't say. What are the 5 other categories that were awarded that night?
Best villain, sexiest male, sexiest female, best fight, and the last one escapes me.
Well, the last one has a shitty name. That's why. It's most memorable moment, which...
You say as we had a podcast called The Greatest Moments.
Greatest Moments is better. Memorable moment is it's the same word. It's too much for what you're describing.
And I remember it now. Rupert stealing the shoes is what won that.
It was. Rupert was a big winner that night. If only the awards other than the one he won gave out money.
Yeah, so Rupert, he won sexiest female. No, I'm playing. He won
bonus points if you can name all the winners of each of the awards.
Well, sexiest female, I believe, was Jenna Maraska.
Incorrect.
No, was it Heidi?
Nope.
Huh. Wow. It wasn't Colleen.
No, but Colleen was nominated.
Colleen was nominated. I know that. Well, let's just not get into that just yet. But who won it? Let's just get it out of the way. Was it Amber?
Yeah, it was Amber.
Okay. So anyway, we're going to get right into the game changers again. Not to be mistaken again with Survivor Game Changers. Even though some of these people did show up on Survivor Game Changers, but that wasn't necessarily the season of Game Changers, that's for sure. So, we left off last time, just for a little recap on who we talked about. We had Colby Donaldson, Danny Boatwright, Sandra Diaz Twine, Parvati Shallow, Nick Wilson, Bob Crowley and Yao Man Chan, Dominic Abate and Chris Underwood, Malcolm Freeberg, Cowboy Bowie, and Yul Kwan. And at number 10, we're going to be continuing off this list, and we have another slash today. So, at number 10, we've got Todd Herzog / Jeremy Collins. You want to get right into this one, Madison?
Yeah, so you may be asking yourself, why have we included both of them for the same game-changing strategy, game-changing aspect of their games, or whatever? Words are not my strong suit right now, clearly. But Todd, in my opinion, Todd and Jeremy. Both, like I said, words not doing great today. I don't know.
Jeremy Collins!
But them employed the meat shield strategy to me. Obviously, Todd didn't call it a meat shield strategy. Jeremy was the one who really coined that term and made it a really popular strategy in the game. Todd was the first one to really do it and do it successfully. He intentionally surrounded himself by people who were bigger threats than him. They weren't bigger threats than him necessarily because they were better at playing the game, or they were like, they had a really big chance at winning. Like, a lot of them were big threats because they were really annoying, so people always wanted them out. So if he kept them around and brought them with him farther into the game, he was going to, like, they were going to be the first targets because they were annoying and everyone hated them and wanted to get rid of them. And then other people were like James. James was going to get voted out when they had a chance because he was a big immunity threat. There were a lot of different types of players that season that he was keeping around, all of them because they protected him. Jeremy obviously did the same thing, and he was very vocal about it. He wanted to keep around strong players who would be thought of as big threats in ways that he was considered a big threat, so that they would be a target over him when they were targeting people who were threatening in that way, which is very similar to Todd's strategy, which is why we've included them together for the meat shield strategy. Jeremy popularized it. Todd really not invented it, but he was the first one to do it really successfully.
Yes. So yeah, that's kind of why we have the 50-50 on Todd and Jeremy right here. We had a debate as we were making this list. Madison said, oh, it's Todd, it's Todd, it's Todd. And I said, no, it's Jeremy. It's Jeremy who's the game changer because he's the one who popularized the strategy for future players. And we kind of had a disagreement about that. But you do look in between Todd and Jeremy, there were still people who used the meat shield strategy in different ways. Like an easy example that comes to mind is Tony, because he claimed that Spencer and Tasha, I mean, he's talked about this in podcasts and stuff, were his buffers. So he's like, oh, I had a different term for it, but yeah, I called them the same sort of thing. So you see, I mean, Tyson had it for a little bit in Blood versus Water with Aris. You've seen it in other seasons pretty frequently. But I would argue that Jeremy was the big game changer, but Todd also, I can acknowledge, kind of used the same sort of thing. And interestingly enough, I look at both of them, they didn't really have any meat shields late in the game. Like, in terms of, final 6, I don't think they really had a meat shield there. Like, Jeremy's biggest shield, per se, was Kelly Wentworth, just because Kelly Wentworth was the target a lot. Or Spencer, because Spencer was the other good competitor there. And then for Todd, who was it, PG? Like, there wasn't really much of a meat shield there. Eric, I guess Eric would be the biggest one.
Yeah, well, the big thing is, for the meat shield strategy to work effectively, you have to cut your meat shields before it's too late.
Yes.
So when you get to Final 6, you really want to be left with at max 1 meat shield left. You don't have time to get rid of more than one person.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. They didn't really even have one. That's what's crazy about it.
Yeah. Which is why their games are really the ones to look at as the pinnacle of this strategy, because they really did it so, I'm not going to say effortlessly, but they did it so well that it made it seem effortless on TV. And a lot of that has to do with just who they are as people. They can do something like that. But it really, that's why it's a popular strategy that people come into the game now. When it comes to Jeremy's game, he made it look so easy. It's not easy, but now everyone's like, well, this is how you should play the game, meat shields. And they're all not doing a very good job at it, comparatively.
The lions need to come together and go against the hyenas. That's the truth.
Exactly.
Bit of a recoin of a term right there, but got to give Tony the credit where it's due. So, Todd and Jeremy, what's interesting about them, too, is that this strategy has come up so frequently, especially since Jeremy's done it. I look at all these people that have played since then. You saw Adam do it a lot in MVGX. You saw Wendell do it in Ghost Island. You saw Nick do it in David vs. Goliath. And you definitely saw Tony do it in Winners at War. And you saw a lot of meat shields at that time. Tommy did it in Island of the Idols. So it's come up so frequently since Jeremy's done it. So this is why it had to be mentioned that these guys are game changers. because they've completely changed the way a lot of, especially males, play. Some females can incorporate a meat shield kind of strategy, but it's a lot tougher because generally perception of females is automatically lower, and that's a whole nother issue, but it's just how it goes in the game. So these guys who perceive themselves as the fourth biggest threat out there want to have the top 3 threats on their side.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember kind of the differences between their games and to look more to Todd's game for how to do the meat shield strategy in a newbie season, because a definition of a meat shield is going to be very different in a newbie season. It's going to be very much based on like first impressions, physical appearances, and their shown personality. But on a returnee season, like Second Chance, it's going to be based on what you saw the first time or the previous times that they played Survivor. And that's what you use to base threats. And your strategy might almost be a little bit more transparent coming into a returning player season, because everyone knows kind of who's a threat and for what reason. So if you're just going straight to the obvious threats, it's pretty obvious what you're doing. So balancing the needs of the different types of games and how to work that strategy in is really important. And I think a lot of people, where they go wrong is they just try and copy Jeremy, but Jeremy played a different game than you because it was a returning player season. You can't replicate that type of game in a newbie season. You're not going to win.
Yeah, here's a good example. Rick Devens, when he inevitably returns, he will be considered one of the Lions, one of the meat shields out there. However, the first time he was out, hell no, nobody saw him as that big of a threat immediately coming onto that island. Whereas you look at someone else, I don't know, just an example would be like Caleb in Calrong. You go up to the island and you're like, that guy's a beast, and he's already played Big Brother, as a lot of people would know, and you'd say, he's a meat shield that I could protect myself under. Whereas you go out and Game Changers, you're like, he's not really a meat shield. He didn't really do anything in his game. So it can kind of flip. It depends on when you're playing the game, for sure.
Exactly. Let's move on to our number 9.
Yep. And at number 9, it's another person who really cemented a core component of strategy into the game. And that's Brian Heidick. And Brian Heidick is well known for being the first person to implement the GOAT strategy, where you bring someone who is very much not likable and way less likable than you are to the end, so you have an easy win. Mind you, for Brian, it didn't end up being that easy. It was a 4-3 vote. So Clay was not necessarily like the best GOAT choice. I guess he was the best GOAT choice considering who was out there, but it was still a really close call for Brian. So it goes to show how dislikable Brian was, too, to a lot of these people. He was just slightly more likable than Clay. And that was the only person he could stand a chance against, and he acknowledged that, and that's what he tried to do. Now, you look at people, like, immediately after that, it starts getting used. Rob Sesternino's bringing along Machete Matt the whole game in Amazon. He's saying, this is the guy I'm going to bring to the end, because I'm easily going to be able to win against him, because he's not even from this planet. You look at a bunch of other later Survivor seasons. It just keeps on happening. The GOAT strategy, very common. Boston Rob's very well known for using that in Redemption Island with Philip. And the GOAT strategy is something that just keeps on coming around. It's a bit tougher to see in returnee seasons. That's what I definitely think. But it is something that can happen. And there's also different kinds of GOATs. Some people are GOATs because they've betrayed too many people, and nobody likes them because of that. Some people are GOATs because they haven't done anything in the game. They've just been a sitting duck and followed whatever anyone else has said. So there's different kinds of GOATs out there. In the case of someone like Clay, in Brian's case, he was kind of someone who was a bit in power, but nobody liked him. He just rubbed people the wrong way. So it's another thing of perception where you look and you see, who are other people hating, or who do other people feel has fucked them over throughout the game. And Brian is the person that latched onto that right away. And you see it so much in later Survivor games that it was definitely worth mentioning Brian, since he is the de facto originator of the GOAT strategy.
Yeah, I am totally with you. I haven't seen Thailand, so I can't speak a whole ton to like Brian's individual game.
Don't watch it.
But like, fair. No, but I can speak to like the strategy as a whole, and I know from my knowledge of Survivor, Brian Heidick was the originator of the GOAT strategy. That's not really a super debatable topic. Like, that's just how it is. That is the history of the game. I think.
But Madison, Kim Johnson. No, I'm playing.
Okay. But I think, first of all, let's talk for a second about Lil, who I think is the best image of a GOAT in Survivor history, and was just 2 seasons later. So that's really showing the continuation. Is there were really 3 seasons in a row where the whole game was trying to get this GOAT to the end. Sester, Nino, and Amazon just trying to drag Matt along. Everyone liked Matt. He was just weird. Like, he was a good guy. There was nothing really wrong with him, but no one was going to give him the money because he was a weirdo. And that's 2003 for you. 2000, like, next season, Pearl Islands. The entire cast of Pearl Islands hated Lil. That's the entire reason she got voted back into the game with the Outcast twist, is the people who were on the Outcast tribe hated her so much they didn't want her ruining their pre-jury trip, so they voted her back into the game so they didn't have to deal with her. That's how hated she was. And Johnny Fairplay just dragged her all the way to the end so that he could beat her, because he could see that, and he hated her too. It's moments like this that, and you're right about the 2 different types of GOATs, and I think that the best illustration of that is Redemption Island with Natalie Tenorelli, who didn't do anything, and that's why she was a GOAT, and Philip Shepard, who everyone thought was crazy and who was kind of an asshole to people. And
kind of. Did you see his interactions with Steve on that island? Yikes.
To be fair, I haven't watched Redemption Island since it aired. I don't remember any of it. But I also think that, like, some of that could have just been, like, very much editing and stuff like that. I haven't even listened to really interviews with people from the Redemption Island cast about Redemption Island, so I wouldn't be able to really say anything definitively about how people viewed Philip the entire time during the game. But, like, he was crazy and people were not giving him the money. That was pretty obvious to see. And that's the beauty of this strategy, is almost every newbie season has a GOAT. And like that you can point to, and you can figure it out by the time the merge hits. You know, for the most part, who the GOATs are. It might take an episode or 2 past the merge, but then it's clear as day.
Yes.
Who is going to get dragged to the end?
Like Nora in Island of the Idols.
I think Millennials Gen X is another great example, because everyone was just trying to drag Hannah and Kent to the end. The entire cast has owned up to that. They were all just fighting to get to the end with Hannah and Kent. And that's how ubiquitous this strategy is the entire cast can come to a consensus to get to the end with these GOATs. And that they all know that that's what they're fighting to do. And that's how big of a piece of Survivor legacy and strategy this strategy is. The GOAT strategy is here to stay. It's never going away, and it's an effective strategy. It's gotten a lot of people their wins. Sandra wouldn't have won if she wasn't sitting next to Lil, probably. Brian definitely wouldn't have won if he was sitting next to most other people.
The only other person might have been Ted. Like, yeah.
Exactly. So, and I think people actually really respected Ted, which is, it hurts me to say that a little bit, but I do think people really respected Ted. So I really do think Brian only could have beat the GOAT. And you have to, like, the GOAT is, if the goal is to win, find a GOAT.
Yes.
You're probably going to win that way then.
The way that Brian changed the game is he changed it to a point where it's not just about getting to the end, it's about who you're sitting with at the end. And that was something that wasn't really thought about beforehand. It was just, how can I get to the end, and then I can get my $1 million by trying to convince the jury. At this point, it was, well, first I'm going to try and sit there with someone I can beat easily, and then I'll worry about convincing the jury if I don't get there with that person that I can easily beat. So it completely changes the game. As you were saying, Millennials versus Gen X, people are jockeying just to get there to the end with a certain set of people. That's all they wanted. They just want to get there with a certain set of people so they can beat them easily.
Yeah. The strategy has changed the game completely. Brian Heidick is unquestionably a game changer. What's next?
All right. So we're going to move on to number 8. And at number 8, we've got Sierra Easton. And guess what, guys? She voted out her mom. Take it away, Madison.
That is not the move we have her on this list for. The move, if we're going to just have it be one move, the move is going to Rox at 6. And really, the reason Sierra is on this list is she has pushed the game towards big moves. Some of that obviously has to do with production. They like her. They keep bringing her back because she likes big moves. So it's bringing it into the culture. But she has very much staked her claim on big moves. She chants it at tribal councils. That's what all of her pregame press is about. Her brand is big moves. And no move is bigger than going to Rox. That tribal council made Rox a possibility in Survivor. No one had really even used Rox as a threat until that point, because you literally hadn't seen it since season 4. And this was season 27. It had been 23 seasons since we'd seen a rock drawn on Survivor. And now it's been seen. It still hasn't been seen a lot. It's still a very extreme strategy. It's a big move.
It's been seen once more, at least, though.
But the threat of it has been seen a lot more, and it's actually seen now as like a fairly viable strategy. It may not be used a lot more, but people are willing to go there now, which is really the change in the game that has happened. That people are more willing to take risks in Survivor to get. We've moved into an era of Survivor that is big risk, big reward, as opposed to medium risk for low reward or low risk for low reward, and just trying to get yourself to the end. Everyone's now focusing on that resume, the full resume, and getting as many things on that resume that the jury can see with their own eyes. That's the goal of Survivor now for most people, is to get a big enough resume that they're seen as worthy of winners by the jury and by everyone, the entire Survivor community. We've seen a lot of Survivors be successful not doing that. Tommy Sheehan is the best example of him being explicitly like, I don't care about big moves. I don't need anything flashy. I'm playing a nice old school game of Survivor and getting to the end that way and not worrying as much about my resume. And it worked for him. But we're in an era of Survivor where big moves are the focus, and that is because of Sierra Easton.
I mean, even voting out her mom is a big move on paper, just because of the implications behind it. You're voting out your loved one at that point. And I know Laura would have been going home anyway, but voting out your mom is still a big move. I know we joke about it all the time, but this is just, it is who Sierra is as a player. And the way she's transformed the game is great. We definitely saw it a lot more in Second Chance, the way she was changing the game. Because she keeps on saying big moves, big moves, big moves. That's like, I mean, if you want to play a drinking game to a Survivor season, drink every time Sierra says big moves in Second Chance. It happens a lot. But then we see that the person who ends up winning at the end compared to who they're sitting with, because Jeremy's sitting there with Spencer and Tasha. He wins because he's actually the one who has made big moves throughout the game. He's the one who plays an idol on Stephen Fishback. He's the one who saves himself with an idol. And he's out there making big moves to try and get himself to the end of the game. Whereas Spencer and Tasha didn't really make big moves. That's just the truth. They played solid games. They just didn't make big moves like that. And then you keep on seeing it throughout later seasons of Survivor. And after Jeremy's win, you see Michelle's win, and people are pissed because they're like, she didn't make big moves. Well, to be fair, she hadn't seen Second Chance. But also, like, it's just... her perception of her win was bad because she didn't make big moves. That's the truth behind it. And Aubrey had made big moves, and people were like, why didn't she win? Then you go through later seasons. Adam making big moves. Sarah making big moves. Ben making big moves. Wendell not so much, and that's another... he made some big moves, but not as many as Dominic. But it shows that the people who make big moves are often the ones who are perceived as the people that should win, or are the people that are going to be winning more frequently. Because technically, if you think about it, Ben didn't play as good of a game as Chrissy or Ryan. I still argue Ryan played the best game in that season, and I will argue that to my grave. However, Ben made big moves. The Ben bomb was a huge deal. And he took influence from people like Malcolm and people like Sierra in order to get that done. So it goes to show, big moves are what's... they're the big thing in Survivor right now. And they still are. People are saying, oh, we've moved on from the big moves era. No, we haven't. It's still about making big moves to get to the end. It's just... it's said differently. It's building a resume. And you brought up Tommy as someone who didn't really make big moves. He didn't have advantages, but I'd still argue he made some big moves in that game. He definitely made some very critical votes throughout that game in order to get to the end. I mean, he was very instrumental in the Kelly vote off, and that was a huge move in the game. And didn't he do the same with like Missy and Aaron? He kind of drove it to where it was going to be, what was the tribe, Lyro? It was going to be his tribe that was dominating for the rest of the game, though. And he also knew about other people's advantages and kind of planted seeds to get them to use those, like with Dean, with the Idol Nullifier, and with Nora choosing Tommy to not go to fire. That was a big move. So,
but
he had big moves. They just weren't with the flash.
Well, I'd argue he was not the big moves candidate in that final tribal council. Dean was the big moves candidate in that tribal council. His entire argument was like, look at all these crazy things I found, I did, and that I've, like, the only reason I'm here is I've done a lot of crazy shit, and I made a relationship with this guy. And that's why I'm sitting here today. Whereas Tommy's was, I made a relationship with each and every one of you. That meant that I didn't have to go and do crazy things. I just did the smart thing that would not piss people off, but also get me farther in the game. Mm-hmm. That to me is not big moves. That is a social game. And typically, if you're focusing on your social game, you're not focusing on big moves. They're kind of in contradiction to each other.
He did both, but it just goes to show that resume building is the thing, but it does incorporate big moves. And Tommy built his resume throughout the game, and he had some big moves trickled in, but they weren't the flashy moves that Dean was making. So I still think he made big moves throughout the game, and they built to his resume. And I do agree that it was definitely Dean was the candidate there, saying, I'm the one who's made the biggest moves. However, Tommy definitely did make big moves in his own right, and he was able to explain that in his final tribal. He had a very good final tribal performance, I thought.
I agree. I just also, look, we have to also keep in mind that we are in a new era of Survivor, so, like, you're not even going to be considered by the jury if you don't have some sort of quote-unquote big move.
Yes.
You're not going to be considered. So Tommy not being a big move, like, not being the picture of big moves, but still having done big moves, that's a product of the time of Survivor he was playing in and the type of game he had to play to get to the end. Mm-hmm. He still represents a step back and a step away from big moves era Survivor. Yes. So, yeah.
All right, so we're going to move on to number 7, though. And number 7, this one has to do with the concept of live tribal, and we had to do a slash for this. So my internet connection's unstable right now, apparently, according to Zoom, but we are back. So I'm not even going to edit that out. Anyway, at number 7, we've got JT Thomas and Hayden Moss, and they're slashed together as two different people on the same rank. And the reason for this is because it was another one that Madison and I discussed extensively. The reason why I argued Hayden was because I felt Hayden was the person that made live tribal into a thing. It ties into the rock draw with Sierra, but he's the one convincing Sierra throughout that, and it becomes a live tribal there, where the tribal is not so much about having preconceived notions and knowing who you're going to vote for going into it. It was a war between two sides in order to get the vote in their favor, and the vote still wasn't decided at that tribal very clearly. And ultimately, it got decided at that tribal because of what Hayden was able to do. Sierra could have easily just gone with the other side, but she was convinced by Hayden because Hayden made it into a live tribal. Whereas JT, he's another person that has contributed to the evolution of the live tribal by being the guy in Game Changers who sprout up off his stump and went and talked to Brad and whispering. Whispering's become a huge thing in tribals. We've seen it in Heroes, Healers, Hustlers. We saw it in Edge of Extinction. I believe we saw it in David vs. Goliath, too. And we saw it in Winners at War, for sure. So we've seen whispering happen a lot. We saw it in Island of the Idols as well. So whispering's become a part of the game at Tribal. It happened so much at Winners at War that Denise just said, I've had enough. You know, it's a very big part of the game at this point to get up and whisper. And it's only contributed to the live Tribal, where people are actually talking about the vote at Tribal. And it's like Jeff isn't even a factor sometimes. It's just people are talking. So this is why it's kind of 50-50 here, because Hayden introduced live tribal, JT extended live tribal a lot with whispering. So it's kind of a 50-50. Who do you want to give the credit to here? They're kind of similar in that way. Both contributed to changing the game a lot.
Yeah, you made great points, obviously. I just want to point out Hayden is not the person who invented live tribals. Malcolm very much dealt. Yes, he was the one who started the trend of live tribals. So I just wanted to make that clear, which still is very game changing, because being the originator of something is very. Because we didn't give Kathy credit, or once again, I haven't seen Marquesas. We didn't give the Final Four of Marquesas credit for a rock draw. We gave the credit to Hayden and Sierra in season 27. Season 4 was the first rock draw, but it wasn't the one that started the trend of rock draws, which still there's only 2 in that trend, but you know what I mean. We've discussed it already. But Hayden very much made tribal, like, most seasons nowadays have one live tribal where the decision is made at tribal council or very, very close to tribal council, like 5 minutes or less before they leave. And JT pushed that to more closely fit the big moves era of Survivor, where instead of just saying it directly in front of everyone, now people are just running around and talking to everyone all over the place, and it's complete chaos. And that is due to JT. JT is who to blame for the whisper era of Survivor. And it's led to more live. I hesitate to call them live tribals because the players will tell you most of them don't change the result of the tribal council at all. Some of them do. And I think in Game Changers and Heroes, Healers, Hustlers, and even in Edge of Extinction, when people were getting up and whispering, it was a live tribal. Mm-hmm. The past 2 seasons, I would not say that. But that still fits in with the whole trend of tribal council is now more and more a part of the game. Not as much playing to the jury, but it's more of a game within your cast. and within the people still on your tribe. And you have to play even more now at tribal council, and you can't do anything wrong. That could screw up your entire game to do just one wrong thing at tribal council. And that wasn't really the case until Hayden Moss popularized using tribal council as a vessel to change the vote.
Yes.
AKA a live tribal. And JT very much continued that trend and changed it in a very significant way that has changed how they happen.
People say
have them both on the list.
People say at these Whisper tribals that, oh, well, these players might not be changing the result necessarily by getting up and whispering. Well, one thing they're failing to state is that they seeked confirmation that the plan was still going on, and that's why they still need to whisper. That's why it's a live tribal, because there was no confirmation beforehand. The confirmation happens at tribal. So it's still an extension of the game, even if whispering, they're like, oh, it doesn't really change the result that much. Well, obviously it's still alive because you're seeking confirmation from other people that the plan's still going to happen, and you're worried that someone's going to flip because of a whisper. So anyway, we're going to move on to number 6 right here, and I'm going to let Madison take this one away. We got Tony Vlachos right here, and Tony has definitely set his mark and definitely posted his flag in Fiji because he has changed the game a hell of a lot.
So I will say for our top 6, they aren't, unlike the rest of the group, they're not as much on here for like one very specific reason. They all have done a good amount of different things that have really changed and shaped the way that Survivor is played.
This is a new tier right here, completely new tier,
exactly.
6-1. Yes.
Yeah, 6-1. They're all on here for very different reasons than the first 14 people that we discussed. Tony, obviously, he's one of two-time winners, and he has done so much to change the game. He, along with Sierra, really pushed Survivor into the big moves era. He, in the middle school era of Survivor, should not have won Cagayan. That transition really happened with Blood versus Water and Cagayan to really set up the big moves era of the 30s. It wasn't the beginning of it, but it set up the ability for that era of Survivor to happen. And let's just list some of the crazy stuff that Tony has done that other people have done similar things to, or have thought about doing similar things to, or just, once again, words, not my strong suit today for some reason. His bag of tricks and lying about what his actual advantages are. And then his spy shack, spy bunker wasn't ever successful. He's tried it multiple times and it's never worked. And then the spy nest was also very practical for him. Not very many people could pull that off, but it has really brought the interest back of, let's go eavesdrop on people and see if we can figure out what they're saying. A move that Sandra did back in the Pearl Islands. But it wasn't really used for most of the history of Survivor. His whole theory of lowering his threat level in Winners at War, that is a strategy that I think is going to be so essential to future returning player games. Not necessarily seasons, mixed seasons. I still think that's a strategy that's going to be essential for returning players. And we obviously haven't seen that change the game yet. It will. It's definitely going to change the way that people play the game. People are going to come into the game and really explicitly talk about the ways in which they're going to lower their threat level, which is an aspect of the game that people haven't really discussed before. It's definitely been thought about. You've heard other people talk about it, especially in their post-game interviews, but never really on the show or in pre-game press. And you can tell someone's really a game changer when Survivor starts casting knockoff versions of them. We got a whole bunch of knockoff Russells right after Russell was on the show. We got a whole bunch of knockoff people from Borneo, people from Australia. They really wanted to fill those, and those were the two shaping casts of Survivor. We got a whole bunch of people who fit into those archetypes. We have a whole bunch of knockoff Tonys. The most famous of them all, I would argue, Joe Mena. Joe Mena is very much a knockoff Tony. And that really shows you that even Survivor thinks that Tony really changed the game fundamentally.
Yeah, for sure. And Tony, it's just like the amount of hard work that goes into gameplay is another thing that I think is pretty game-changing with Tony. Especially noticeable in Winners at War, because he has talked about how he was up all night creating fires, looking for idols, all of that sort of stuff. You mentioned lowering the threat level, but even in Cagayan, he was doing a lot of stuff. You mentioned the eavesdropping. I think another thing that has been game-changing is he can't really just say, oh, I swear on my child or whatever. People are right onto that. Lying about a profession, I think, has become even more common because of Tony. I think Tony, he might not have been the person who created ideas, but he took them so far when he had them that he was able to bring them to new heights. And you look at, you mentioned how Sandra is eavesdrop. Tony's eavesdropping is new heights. Spy shacks, spy
literally
nests. Yeah, I mean, literally. I mean, going up into a tree to listen to people. Building a shelter simply to listen to people. That's crazy stuff right there. It changes how people interact at the well. How people go about being around the well when they're approaching the well. We saw this with Ben. Ben was approaching it slowly in Heroes, Healers, Hustlers. Then he hears what people are saying. He says, oh, so this is what's going on. So it changes the dynamics of where people are at camp. And then it's just crazy the type of stuff that Tony's done. Lying about advantages. That wasn't really happening before. He said, oh yeah, I can use this in the Final Four. Well, we see a lot of people lying about advantages. I mean, one that comes to mind, Dean creates a fake legacy advantage. And he goes absolutely insane doing that. It's all over the place. People are lying about advantages all the time, and it's all because of Tony and how he was so successful with that.
Yeah, I think what you said about Tony not necessarily creating any new strategies is really, I'd never thought of it that way, but I do think what Tony does best is he takes existing game structures or existing Survivor strategies or just existing aspects of the game of Survivor, and he just amplifies them from like a 5 to 7 to like a 10. He takes every aspect of Survivor to its maximum and really utilizes everything he possibly can. He really does take the bag of tricks that Survivor has shown us in its first however many years before Cagayan aired, and he took all of those and he knew all of them and had them all in his head at his disposal and was really good at figuring out which one was going to be the most beneficial to him at that current juncture of the game, which is so impressive and crazy and important and just mind-blowing.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to move on to number 5 here, and I'll take the brunt of number 5, and it is my boy, Rob Cesternino. Rob Cesternino has changed the game tremendously. A lot of people would argue that Rob Cesternino, without him, Survivor wouldn't be a thing today. And that just is a testament to how much he has changed the game. And Rob, what he did best was not necessarily stick with tribal lines. That was never what Rob was about. He didn't care about tribal lines. He cared about getting to the end, and that was his thing. So if you want to talk about evolving strategy and advancing strategy, Rob Cesternino took a huge step to do that. The way that he's playing in Amazon, playing back and forth, going from one alliance to the next. And I just got done with an Amazon rewatch, so I know a lot about this in my head right now. he's aligned with people like Alex, Jenna, and Heidi and Dina, but then he's like, yeah, I'm going to flip on Dina with the rest of the tribe. I don't really care about that. But guess what? I'm going to take it a step further. Alex is gone too. And he keeps on going. Then he sticks with them for a little bit. And then when he needs to, he hops back and says, you know what, I'll vote out Christy right here. And then he hops back. Oh, I'll vote out Heidi. And it keeps on going back and forth. He's playing ping pong right there. That's what he's doing. And it's incredible to watch exactly how Rob was playing, especially in comparison to the past 5 seasons. Because you look at the end game for all of these seasons, it wasn't necessarily tribal lines, but once they got with an alliance at the merge, they rode that alliance. Because, I mean, Marquesas would be the example of that, where they create a new alliance starting at the merge, basically. When Kathy, Nalia, and Pascal all flip to go with V and Sean Rector, and they go to the end of the game together. And, I mean, the other ones were tribal lines. I mean, Africa, Australia, Thailand, and Borneo, all tribal lines right at the end. But Rob Cesternino did not give a rat's ass about that. And, I mean, a tribe swap definitely helped that become possible, I thought. The tribe swap in the middle of the game and people actually liking the people on those tribes. But he saw these interpersonal relationships and he knew exactly what he needed to do. And he also, I think he changed the game in terms of the way he broke up these relationships. He said, yeah, I can't have Alex and Shauna together going into the merge, so he made sure to cut Shauna. I can't have Alex here with Jenna and Heidi, so he made sure to break that up. And he had to make sure to break up Jenna and Heidi later on in the game too, because he knew they were inseparable, and no matter what, they were going to go to the final 2 with each other, so he could not compete against that in the final 3. That was his thinking. So he's the guy who's taking these personal relationships, these duos, and cutting them out. And that was something we'd start to see a lot more in Survivor. It definitely comes to mind in later seasons like Vanuatu. I know they were like, well, Leanne's way too close to these girls like Julie, and we need to get her out. So it keeps on occurring in these later seasons. Even in Winners at War, Tony's acknowledging Sarah and Sophie are way too close to each other. I need Sarah on my side, so I'm going to cut Sophie out of here. It keeps on happening. And Rob Cesternino, I believe, is the one to thank for that. He's the one who made tribal lines and alliances not matter as much, and he made it more of an individual game, especially after the merge. And the other thing that he did is he decided to cut out personal relationships. That was a big thing that he seeked throughout Amazon, and is still very much a factor to this day.
Yeah, Rob absolutely changed the game of Survivor. He made the game more fluid, because, as you were saying, the first 5 seasons, the game felt very rigid. There wasn't a whole ton of room to play, especially post-merge. Once the merge hit, things felt pretty solid, and you moved forward with that alliance. Rob shook that up. I think the other thing that is really game-changing about Rob is just how much he played into the theme of his season, which this was the first season with a theme, so it's likely this would have happened with someone else as well, but Rob really kind of went all in when it came to men versus women. How can I tell my story in a way that fits into the narrative of the season as it's been presented to me? It's been presented as men versus women. I'm going to make sure that I set my story up in comparison to the storyline that's already going to be happening throughout the season. And I think that smart players in seasons, especially seasons that have a versus theme, so brains versus brawn versus beauty, men versus women, millennials versus Gen X, David versus Goliath, the more that you can be really smart about telling your story in relation to that theme that's already been set up for you, that you know is going to be how they want to tell the story, the smarter of a Survivor player you are. Because you're going to be shown on TV. If you can present your story in a way that's definitely going to match the story they're trying to tell, they're going to show more of you. you've been frozen on my screen. I've been able to hear you, but you've been frozen for the past like 10 minutes and you just unlocked. And it was so jarring. It was literally the first motion I've seen on my screen in literally 10 minutes. But Rob Cesternino revolutionized Survivor. I think that the people who say that Survivor would not exist if it were not today, if it were not for Rob Cesternino, are totally right. If we would have had 10 seasons of Survivor that were just all pagongings, or even more cases, like it was one alliance flip and then it was essentially a pagonging of the new minority alliance. Like, if that would have been the game every time, it would have been super boring and people would have stopped watching. But Rob Cesternino opened up the game, allowed it to be more fluid, allowed alliances to be more easily broken without it being seen as a moral failing or a moral breach of contract almost. The more successful Survivor could be in the future, and we only have him to thank for that.
Yes,
and we do to this day. Obviously, he's still one of the most beloved figures in the Survivor community.
Yes, and it's something that I'm thankful for, definitely, because I think that a podcast like this would not exist without Rob Cesternino. I truly feel that way, because without Cesternino, we aren't able to go into the intricacies of strategy, really. Like, it's like, well, it's pretty straightforward. Then we'd just be saying, yeah, well, this group was bigger than that group. That would be the most boring podcast of all time. So, we would not have made that podcast. We wouldn't be watching Survivor if it was still like that. We'd be like, this show sucks. What's the point? So, got to thank Rob C for that.
Totally.
All right, we're going to move on to number 4, though. And number 4, coming in the season just after Amazon, straight out of Pearl Islands, we got Johnny Fairplay. You want to take this one, Madison?
Johnny Fairplay is probably the first person in Survivor that's really going on there to be a reality TV show star. Obviously, other people are on there for like notoriety and things like that. He's the first person who I think really went into the game to be like, I want reality TV to be my career now, and I want to be as big of a character as I possibly can. That was his goal. So that's the first way he changed the game, is he changed the motivations that you can possibly have for the game. He added that to the list. 2, he was probably the first person to come into the game with absolutely no morals. He did not care what he had to do to win. He was going to do, and even Brian Heideck had some morals. I think he's the only other person who you could make an argument for, but it's definitely him or Fairplay. But Fairplay had no morals. He would screw anyone over to get the $1 million. That's what he was prepared to do. And he showed that. He really showed us that he was willing to do whatever it took, from the infamous dead grandpa's lie at the family visit, which is another game-changing thing, to really use that family visit as a strategic moment, and to gain sympathy and to really humanize yourself, especially someone like him who knew he was going to come into the game and almost dehumanize himself and make a caricature of himself. He needed that moment later in the game to humanize himself. The last way that Johnny Fairplay really changed the game is he never, ever really cared about tribal strength or really tribal unity at all. That was never really one of his goals. His goal at the beginning of the game was to get rid of all the people he thought could beat him in the end. That's why he got rid of Burton, because he was like, Burton's great, let's just get rid of him. That's especially that early in the game of Survivor, but even to this day, that is not the strategy that most tribes have in the tribal phase of the game. They say, let's keep the tribe strong so we can win and not vote people out, and keep the strong people, not get rid of the people who are actual threats to win, who tend to be the strong people who you want to keep in the beginning phase of the game. That's the eternal conundrum of Survivor. And Johnny Fairplay was definitely the first person to ignore all of that and to ignore all of the standards to the tribal phase of the game that had really been set up beforehand in the first 6 seasons, and that are still to this day mostly followed. But he still opened up that strategy and made the pre-merge phase of the game a little bit more exciting and a little bit less predictable.
Yes, Fair Play definitely did that with the pre-merge state of the game. It was about, well, yeah, we can still get out people that we feel are threatening here. Who cares about tribal strength as long as I'm still here? I'm just trying to win the game, and I'll do whatever I can to win the game. That's why he's voting out people like Burton. That's a very good point. And the other thing about Fair Play is, you mentioned the whole idea of morality. Yeah, we've seen that before, where morals were definitely less of a part for some people in the game, and that was obvious. Whether you want to talk about Sesternino, Heidick, Richard Hatch was that way. However, Fair Play was the one that sent waves about that. Because when he pulls off this dead grandma line, this is probably the most game-changing moment in Survivor history. I'd argue that, personally. Because when you look at this one moment, you're thinking, why would somebody do that at all? That's the general perception when this is being on magazine covers nationwide. This is how it was. It was on newspapers everywhere. It was a crazy news story. You tune into CNN right now, and if that happened right now, it would be on CNN. That's how crazy of a move this was. It was absolutely insane to people nationwide. Fair Play was getting death threats in his mail. It was insane. And then people are starting to say, well, now I see this and it actually kind of worked for the guy. So, what's the sense of morality in this game? Can I lie, cheat, and steal and get to the end? And then the question later on would become, will they still vote for me if I get to the end? But it's still, he's advancing himself through the game by whatever means possible. And that's further than Sesternino was, than Brian Heidick was. This is him saying, I'll do whatever I can. It's psychological warfare out here, and I got to get everyone in my favor. That's what he did with this move. Nobody cared about any alliances, anything in that circumstance. It was, Fair Play needs to go see his loved one right now, his buddy or whatever. It's like, just because his grandma died. Like, obviously that wasn't true. And there was only one person who was onto his bullshit, and that was Sandra. But it just goes to show, morality became a big part in this game. And for a lot of earlier seasons, and even right after that in All-Stars, morals were everything to a lot of these people. And it was, you go into this game, you play the game, but you keep your own morals. That's how a lot of people felt about the game. There were a few exceptions that I had mentioned earlier. But with Fair Play, that was taken out the window. It wasn't about morals at all. It was about doing whatever you can to win.
Yeah, Johnny really, he was so important to this game because, he was the first person who really, really was a caricature. They came in knowing that he was bigger than life, and that was a goal of his. And that really started the wave of casting people who were bigger than life, who were huge personalities, who were really trying to play up that personality. And Johnny also was the first person to really take every single opportunity he could in the game and use it for strategy. Even moments that you wouldn't expect. That first opening, the opening marooning of that season, he would use all of that for strategy. Walking to challenges, he'd find a way to make that strategic. The loved ones challenge, he made that strategic, especially in a new way. That wasn't about, once I've won, how am I, like, what am I gonna, like, who would I choose to go on the loved ones visit with me if I have to choose people to join me? Like, that was a strategy that already existed a little bit because it was going to be inherently it was going to inherently piss people off. You had to be a little strategic about it, but he brought strategy into the challenge itself and the loved one you choose, and all of those things you now have to think of in such a deep way of how is this going to affect my game? And he was the first person to really do that, to think very critically at every single moment he was out there. How is this going to affect my game, and how can I optimize it to get me to the end and win? And everyone does that to this day.
The rest is history.
The rest is history.
All right, so we're going to move on to number 3. And number 3 is honestly who I thought a lot of people would think would be number 1 here. This is who we consider the godfather of the game, kind of invented the game and really made Survivor become a game about strategy and not about survival. And that's Richard Hatch, right away in Season 1. And Richard Hatch did so much to change the game. A lot of people are saying, oh, he doesn't get credit for creating alliances. Well, he definitely gets credit for carrying an alliance and making sure the alliance sticks together and goes to the end. Sure, Kelly Wigglesworth kind of strayed away a little bit at certain points, but Hatch said, if we stay strong and if we vote together, then we're going to be able to have the majority and we're going to be able to march to the end of this game. And that's exactly what happened with the Toggy 4. And that was very game-changing in that sense. And Richard Hatch was the person who knew it was about relationships, and it's about the way that you're interacting with people, because they need to be able to vote for you in the end. And this is something that I've enjoyed with Richard Hatch's YouTube channel, actually, when he's talked about this. And he said, yeah, this is what this game's about, and this is what the game has always been about to me, and this is how it's structured, and this is how it goes. And you have to make sure that not only do you get to the end, but the people will vote for you in the end. And that's why you see relationships become very important for him throughout the season, especially with Rudy. That was definitely the most emphasized one. He's definitely taking that relationship very seriously. Even early on in this game, you see him have moments with people like Sonya, like early on in the game. It's always in the forefront of his head. I got to build relationships with these people to make sure that if I get to the end, they will vote for me to get that $1 million. And that's part of why he's coming in there with that cocky attitude, saying, I've already got the check written for me. It's just how he felt, because he knew how he was playing this game. And another thing you see out of him is stepping down in that final immunity. And that's another part of him thinking, they've got to vote for me in the end. And this is a very concrete physical example in Survivor of this, where he's saying, well, I got to step down here because Kelly's going to take me, Rudy's going to take me. However, I can't step off and vote Rudy off and have him still vote for me in the end, because if Rudy is voted off by me, he won't vote for me because I haven't been loyal to him at that point. So that would be me losing a jury vote, and I can't do that, and I can't risk that. Because it's either Rudy wins and takes Kelly out, or Kelly wins and takes Rudy out, because that's their biggest competition at that point. So it goes to show he's always thinking, how can I get the jury votes? That's what's important to him. And we hadn't really seen, of course we hadn't really seen anyone think on that level, but we really hadn't seen anybody think on that level. That's the truth. And that wasn't what the viewing audience was thinking. They were thinking, well, the person who gets to the end and was the best at accommodating for other people on their tribe is going to get the votes to win. Yeah, true. But Richard's thinking about this constantly. He's thinking about this in every single interaction he has with people. He's thinking about this when he's fishing for the tribe, everything. So he's definitely a game changer in that, because he's the guy who made jury management a thing.
Exactly. He really showed us that what's really important in the game of Survivor is other people's perceptions of you. He talked about that constantly, and his actions were always about how he was going to be perceived. You said that Johnny Fairplay's Dead Grandma Alive was the most revolutionary move in Survivor history. I think that Richard stepping down at Final Immunity is the most revolutionary move in Survivor history, because it really exemplifies just how important your perception is to the reality of your game. Richard stepped down because he knew if he won, the only way he could win is to go against Kelly. But if he cut Rudy, he wasn't going to win. That was going to piss people off. That was going to piss people off on the jury. It was going to piss Rudy off. It was going to piss off America. He knew how people perceived Rudy. And he knew if he had to vote Rudy out, that was going to be a bad look for him. He also knew that both people would be smart to take him to the end. So he knew their perceptions of him in front of the jury. So he had all of those perceptions floating around in his head. Obviously, it's hard for us to say that Richard changed the game. There wasn't a game before Richard. He was game shaping. He shaped the way that Survivor exists as a TV program. It wouldn't have been... Survivor, the Australian Outback, would have been a very different show if Borneo had not played out the way that it did. Mm-hmm. If it had been not about alliances, if Richard hadn't been there talking about perception versus reality, the Survivor we know and love today would not exist.
And I want to make that clear, the game shaping versus game changing. And that's a reason why we didn't want to put Richard at number one, because we feel while Richard was a big game changer from the onset of him coming out to Borneo and playing the game, and throughout that game he had changed the game just so much within that one season even, that it changed every single dynamic, he was more game shaping than he was game changing in a lot of ways. And we feel our top two were more game changing, and they had already had the diagram and the blueprint of how to play Survivor, but they took it and they spun it. That's how we feel about it. So we're going to go ahead and move on to number two, and Madison's going to take this one away. We got Cirie Fields, so take it away.
Yeah, so at number two, we have my girl, Cirie Fields. Obviously, we both love Cirie. We've talked about her a lot on this channel and on this podcast. Cirie has changed the game in so many ways. She's shown that more people than you would expect can be very good at the game of Survivor. She's famously the woman who just got up off the couch, who wasn't in any way that you would describe her demographically, even just the way that she lives her life back at home. You wouldn't paint her as like one of the best Survivor players of all time. Like, if you were to take her demographics, she doesn't look like any previous fantastic Survivor game players, or she doesn't behave like one either. She isn't super into the outdoors. She's scared of leaves in the first episode. Like, she isn't a physical person. She doesn't really participate a lot in the challenges. They're not her strong suit, except for the puzzle side of things. And she doesn't even interact with people in a very similar way to other successful Survivor players. But she is, one of the things that she's best known for is maintaining an alliance and kind of babysitting an alliance and keeping a group of dysfunctional people together. That's also on top of the 3-2-1 vote in Panama, which was the first of its kind and is a new strategy that people use fairly often in Survivor. She, in Micronesia, she is pivotal in convincing Eric to give up his immunity necklace. And she does a lot of work when it comes to manipulating people's perceptions of the game to fit her narrative and to fit the needs of her game. And that's what she's so good at. Why don't you go and talk a little bit more about Cirie?
Yeah.
For now.
So you mentioned the plurality vote, the 3-2-1 blindside in Panama. And I think that's one of the bigger game-changing moments in Survivor history, because people realized, hey, I don't have to get the majority here. I could make it a plurality, and as long as they have the most votes stacked against them, then they can get voted out. And you see that time and time again in Survivor. And people will say, oh, well, Drew, the first plurality vote was in Borneo. Well, yeah, guess what? Borneo, there was no structure to the votes at all. So since voting structure had become a thing, plurality votes weren't seen as a thing that people were able to do. They were always saying, we got to get the majority on this in order to vote them out. And the voting mindset was always, I need a majority in order to get this person out, even if I'm trying to make a move against them. That's not true. You can get a plurality. You get a small group of people, and then you're able to get it done. We still see it to this day. I mean, the 4-3-2 against Sophie is a great example of that. So it's very game-changing in that way. And yeah, Suri definitely changed the way that people perceive Survivor players. It's not all about who's physically dominant. It's not about who has the most intelligent job in their everyday life. There's different kinds of people that can be threatening. And Suri is one of those, because Suri is the type of person that's so charismatic and may not be the most physically fit, but she's charismatic. She's very good with people. She's very good at forming relationships. And she's very good at keeping a group of people together. And that was mentioned. The Kasaya Alliance, are you kidding me? How do you keep that group of people unified? Suri's able to do that, and that's what's game-changing. It's about keeping people together in a lot of instances. And Suri made sure that was able to happen. But anyway, getting back to the point I said of how different people can be perceived as threats, a great example of this, Janet, I still think, in Island of the Idols, would have never been perceived as a threat by anyone just because of her age, just because she wasn't the most physically fit out there. However, at the end game, she was the most threatening person to win the game. And people wanted to get her out. Sure, you can say, oh, well, fire was a big part of it. But another big part of it is that she was going to win the game if she got there and made the fire, because she's so charismatic. If she was good at making fire and was able to defeat somebody in fire, but was never going to win the game because nobody was going to be able to take her seriously because she wasn't physically fit or she wasn't the most intelligent job, she was a freaking lifeguard. Nobody sees that as a high-class job in the U.S. I don't think people are saying when they grow up, yeah, I want to be a chief lifeguard. That's not what kids are dreaming about in this country. The thing is, though, she was a threat because of people like Suri. And when Suri comes in, Suri has definitely a higher class job. She's a nurse. But that's still a job that's joked about in a lot of ways because, well, why aren't you a doctor? Or, oh, it's just a female dominant. Male nurses are joked about a ton. And that's another problem, but I'm not going to get into the gender problem with that. But this has led to a new breed of people that can be threatening. You see, Russell Swan sees Denise as a huge threat in Philippines because Denise is the older woman who's charismatic. That wouldn't have been possible without Suri. I guarantee that. So Suri was definitely game-changing because she brought a whole new level of a player that's threatening. She brought the plurality vote, and she brought the meaning of the game to a different height when it's, I may not be able to have an alliance or shift an alliance, or I could just keep that alliance right there and make sure that they stick together throughout the game. Even if they don't get along, I need to make sure that I'm manipulating them so they know it's in their best interest to win this game.
Yeah, and I think the other point to bring up when it comes to, like, other types of people can be successful in Survivor, I think that even some of that is just people watching. A lot of people are like Suri. They don't really go outside. They aren't really outdoorsy people. Survivor isn't something that's in their comfort zone. And especially in the early time of Survivor, they were casting people who, like, this was something that was more or less in their comfort zone in one way or another. And Suri didn't fit that, but she definitely opened the door to just normal people like you and I who maybe wouldn't have considered going on Survivor until Suri did, and really showed that anyone is really capable of playing this game. It really doesn't matter your background at all. And that is really important.
Yes. All right, and we are going to move on to number one. Just a quick recap of the top 10 really quick as we had recapped the 20 through 11 before that. Number 10, we had Todd Herzog and Jeremy Collins. Number 9, we had Brian Heidick. 8, Sierra Easton. 7, JT Thomas and Hayden Moss. 6, Tony Vlachos. 5, Rob Sesternino. 4, Johnny Fairplay. 3, Richard Hatch. And 2, Sari Fields. But coming in at number 1, this should be no surprise to anyone who's a Survivor fan at this point. But we put Russell Hantz at number 1. And a lot of people will clown on Russell Hantz, saying, oh, well, he's not really that good of a player because he forgets the social aspect of the game. And that's true. That's an oversight. But Russell Hantz is the definition of someone who has changed the game completely. Russell Hantz brought new meaning to the immunity idol. Sure, Yule did that. He brought new meaning to the immunity idol, but Russell Hantz did that times a million, okay? Russell Hantz is going out there finding idols without a clue. Used to be, people weren't even going to search for an idol without a clue. Then Russell Hantz says, you know what, I'm going to do it. Then he finds it. And people are saying, well, if a clue's not out there, the idol's still got to be out there. We got to search for it. And then it's also the way Russell Hantz is using the idol. He's definitely using it like a political tool in the way Yule was. But the other thing he was doing, he was not afraid to pull that out of his pocket and play it. He was doing that all the time, even if the votes weren't going to come his way. But there was a chance that the votes were going to come his way. He's playing it because that's still his token to safety. And he's saying, even if I play it now, I can find it tomorrow. That's his mindset right there. And he goes out and he finds it again. And then people are shocked. That's why his idol play at the final 11 of Samoa was possible. Because people were like, he can't find it the next day. There's no way. He finds it the next day. And then he brings it back out, and he's like, yeah, I found it. Guess what? You're gone, Kelly. And he's this guy that's not saying it's not about just carrying an idol until the end and using it in the final 5 or whatever. He's using it throughout the game as much as possible, trying to find as many as possible, and he's constantly using the idol as a point of leverage for himself in the game, whether it is using it to bring people on his side or if it's using it to make sure he's safe. He's doing it all the time. Or even to keep an ally safe. We saw that in Heroes vs. Villains. He's using it on Parvati. After he convinces Tyson that voting for Parvati is the best bet for him to win in the end because he's got to stick in the majority for votes. Well, Russell gives the idol to Parvati. Tyson goes home. And it's just that sort of crazy stuff where people weren't thinking, hey, what if I can manipulate the split vote in a different way and then manipulate that by using an idol. People aren't thinking that far ahead strategically. The way Russell Hantz thought strategically was such a big evolution for the game. And it's something that's hard to really put into a podcast like this because almost everything Russell Hantz has done has been so game-changing. I think he found 5 idols throughout his Survivor career in those 2 seasons. I forget if he found one in Redemption Island or not, but even if he did...
There's no way he found one in Redemption
Even if he
Island.
did, he found 5 idols in 2 seasons. At that point, that was unheard of. Mm-hmm. The next closest might have been 1. That's being serious. I think the next closest was 1 idol found by anyone. And now we're seeing people find idols a bunch. You know, we see Tony be able to find 3 idols in a season. Kelly's able to find 3 idols in a season in Island of the Idols and only plays half the game. So people are out there looking for idols all the time. When's the last time you saw an idol clue on Survivor? I don't remember. I seriously don't. I think Second Chance might have been it. And that's because they found an idol clue after they were looking for an idol. Or it might have been Millennials vs. Gen X. But it's because they're looking for idols, and it just happens to be a clue saying, oh, well, the idol's actually a different spot, but it would have been here, basically, if we decided to throw the idol here. So it keeps on showing. Idol clues aren't really that much of a part of the game. It's about looking for idols. He's changed the way production's done that. That's game-changing in of itself. He's changed the strategical layers of the game, and he's changed the way that players approach the game, and he's made advantages become so important to everyone's game of Survivor.
Yeah, obviously Russell has changed the game immensely. Just a correction, Kelly did not find 3 idols. She did have 3 idols. One she was given at Island of the Idols, so that's a little bit different. But she did find
obtained
2.
3 idols.
Yeah, she obtained 3. But I think the only point that I have not a whole ton to add on to Russell. I have 2 main points. The first one is, I think you didn't touch enough on how willing Russell was to play idols for other people. Before Russell, idols were really for you. You use them to benefit your game and to get you farther. And of course, him getting his allies farther was getting him farther, but he is very open with his allies about having idols, and he's very open with them with, I will play this for you to save both of us. Like, I will not hesitate for a second to play my idol for you, and he has played idols for his allies ahead of himself at least once, if not more often. I haven't seen Samoa in a while. I
don't think he did in Samoa.
But like, you could tell even in Samoa, he would have done that if it would have been advantageous to his alliance. He was that with his alliance. Two, he really showed a different way to play from the minority and the power that you can have playing from the minority. It's kind of the same mindset of the like unintentional matsing versus like it's the intentional matsing and the unintentional tandang, like that theory of Survivor, where if you have too much power, you're kind of screwed because then things are just going to crumble beneath you. He showed that you have power from coming from the minority because you can really fight and claw your way to the top, and you're not seen as a threat by the majority alliance because there's only 3 of you. What damage can you do? And the answer is a lot. You can do a ton of damage, even as just 3 people against a large alliance. And Russell Hantz has changed the fabric of the game of Survivor, unquestionably. Is he the best player of all time? No, but he's definitely the biggest game changer that this game has ever seen.
Yes. And I do like that you mentioned the fact of playing in the minority, because that was completely changed by Russell. It truly was. I think about other seasons. Like, I mean, I just rewatched Amazon, and Jen is basically going in with the mindset of, well, if I don't win immunity at this Final Four, I guess I'm going home, basically. And you look at people like Bob Crowley. He sees his only way out as winning immunity. There's other ways out. A lot of times it's going to be tougher, but these people will still even try after Russell. It's not just they're going to gear up for the immunity challenge. I mean, I look at someone that was not even successful with getting numbers on his side, but still was trying to work it. Mike Holloway was constantly trying to work other people and say, we had this alliance. He did this with Dan all the time. He did this with Carolyn throughout that season. And he's thinking, if I can get these 2 people that I think will reasonably come back and be on my side again, then I can get people like Shireen and Jen back with me. Mind you, it wasn't successful for him, and he had to make that immunity run, but it was always in his mind. He was always playing out there. And it wasn't all about winning an immunity challenge for him. He said, I'm going to win immunity because I have to, but I'm still going to try and claw my way through this game and play to the best of my ability. And that wouldn't be possible with Russell Hantz. I mean, you got to keep this in mind. Galoo was up 8-4 in Samoa. And Russell eradicated that by saying, well, Natalie kind of helped him with the first vote. Well, Eric's a big threat. Then it's like, well, let's idle out Kelly. Now we get Shambo on our side, and we find someone who's scared to go to Rocks and John Fincher. Then we're going to get the numbers on our side. And then Shambo sticks with us, and then we got this game rolling out, and we just got to make sure the Galoos don't win immunity, and we're going to be sitting there at the end. And then you look at heroes versus villains. Even within a tribe, you saw it. When he's saying, okay, I'm down 6-3 with Danielle and Parvati right now. That's my alliance. Let's get Tyson out right here. Let's make sure it works. Let's find any way it can work. And then after that, who's the most loyal person on this tribe? Coach. Let's manipulate him and make him think that he's got to be loyal to us. Coach thinks he's loyal to them. Jerry goes along with Coach because they're a duo at that point. That gets foiled. And then they have the numbers. You can find ways to play from the bottom and change it no matter where you are in the game, no matter where you are at the bottom. You're never out in Survivor, and that's an important thing that Russell Hantz definitely taught everyone.
Exactly. There's a lot of players now who say they play better from the bottom. Kelly Wentworth says she plays better from the bottom. When she has too much power, she feels too safe. Russell almost showed us that power isn't the end-all be-all in Survivor. And it also isn't found in the typical places. And that has really changed the way that individuals have played the game. He's changed the way production has shaped the game in future seasons. He's changed the way people view minority alliances. He's changed the way they cast. Like, he has changed almost every aspect of the meta game of Survivor. It's insane.
Except the social aspect.
Except for, if anything, he reinforced previous social norms in the game of Survivor. But all that being said, he really has completely revolutionized the game.
Yes. He is... we say Rob Cesternino definitely changed the strategic game a lot. Russell Hantz created the modern strategic game. And I truly feel that way. So that's going to be a good place to wrap up the podcast for today. Just to let you guys know what's going on next week, we are going to be doing a Heroes vs. Villains 2 casting. And Madison and I are going to be going through and trying to cast what we would cast for Heroes vs. Villains 2. As for the idea for what's going to happen in conjunction with our 2 podcasts a week setup, we don't know for that next one. We're going to figure that out. Hopefully we figure it out before the Heroes vs. Villains 2 podcast, because we would like to let you guys know then. But in the meantime, make sure you follow us on Spotify. Make sure you subscribe on the Apple Podcasts and the YouTube. We are Get Snuffed everywhere. Follow us on Twitter for follow us on Twitter for updates at GetSnuffed_. I kind of spoke a llama there. But just make sure you follow us there. Make sure you leave reviews. Make sure you leave comments. Make sure that you share it anywhere you can. The support would be greatly appreciated. Anything you got to say, Madison?
Yeah, as I say often, give us ideas on things you want us to talk about. We'd love to know what you guys want from us. It's always helpful, and it makes sure that we give you guys content that you want.
Yes.
It's mutually beneficial for both of us. Help us out.
All right. Well, make sure you give us that content, and we'll catch you guys later.